Hey guys, welcome back to Based. Did you know 1 in 5 Americans can't name a single branch of the US government? Or that only 36% of Americans could pass the citizenship test we so stringently insist foreigners be able to ace? Other disturbing statistics? 4 in 10 think the president has the power to declare war. Over half of college graduates do not know that Americans can amend the Constitution, and nearly 60% could not identify what that process even looks like. I couldn't find polling on it, but the vast majority of people seem to believe we are in a direct democracy. You get the picture. All in all, Americans do not know civics. Why is that a significant problem? A few reasons. One, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. But even more importantly, those who do not understand the basic makeup of their own government cannot hope to actually influence it. As Thomas Jefferson once said, an educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people. And that's because we live in what should actually be referred to as a representative democracy, or, to make it less confusing, a constitutional republic. A direct democracy is essentially just mob rule. Whatever camp has even the slightest majority can rule over the rest of the population, meaning 51% could want something drastically different than the other 49% of people and could therefore impose their will and way of life on a large percentage of people who drastically oppose that opinion. Obviously, this kind of system could not sustain itself for long. That 49% wouldn't put up with having their voice drowned out forever, and soon enough, you'd see war and uprisings. A famous quote sums this up nicely, and it says, "Democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch, while liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote." I cannot possibly teach you all of US history and civics in a single episode of Based, though if you've been listening for the past nearly 2 years, you've gotten an excellent primer throughout the episodes. Instead, I want to give you a simple crash course on US civics today. As you know, my goal in this show is to teach you how to think, not what to think. But for today's episode, I'm going to give you the foundations you need to do something about what you think in our system. So let's jump in. First, let's talk basic structure. The way our founders structured our government was actually quite genius and revolutionary. They wanted a system that allowed people to influence and participate in their government, but in a way that protected against the tyranny of the majority. They also realized such a structure was necessary for our nation to remain intact. Because unlike virtually every other nation throughout history, we are not just one single body. Rather, we are a country made up of 50 mini-countries, if you will, who come together as a whole for big-picture items where we become stronger by working together. Think of things like a national self-defense, matters of currency and trade, or immigration. We recognize that by forming an alliance at the national level, we become stronger as a whole, but states still maintain their autonomy too. If the country were structured as a winner-takes-all system, the vast majority of states would have no reason to stay and play ball. Alabama is not sticking around if California can dictate its way of life, nor is Massachusetts going to let Florida direct its day-to-day. Quite simply, none of this works unless each state and the citizens in it feel they have the ability to impact their government at the national level. So to address this, the founders created a system that weights each state based on population. For example, to balance both the interests of bigger and smaller states, the founders gave everyone equal representation in the Senate, 2 senators, and then based the number of representatives each state has in the House on population numbers. So in the US Senate, you will always have 100 senators unless we add new states, whereas in the US House of Representatives, the numbers can change based on population growth and movements. States can lose or add congressional districts based on this. A senator from a state represents the entire state, while a congressional representative in the House only represents the people in their district in that state. The founders also implemented things like the Electoral College to balance the interests of the bigger and smaller states. Were it not for this system, higher population states like Florida, New York, California, or Texas would simply be able to pick the president every time, leaving the interests of the rest of the country, and most of the states, totally unrepresented. Again, who would choose to stay in a system like that? Not many. And just a reminder, constitutionally, states do have the authority to secede from the nation, even though that has not always been honored in our nation's history. But I digress. Instead of relying on just the popular vote to elect the president, under the Electoral College, the votes of each state are weighted according to its population, and they are assigned electors who officially elect the president. Very rarely do those electors vote differently than the popular vote in their state, but it is important to know that they are not bound to do so. These are some of the things that distinguish us from being a direct democracy, where again, everything would be voted on based on simple majorities. Instead, we have a system that protects the will of the states and prevents smaller states from being ran over by larger ones. This system also ensures that individual liberties are upheld and given precedent over the popular whims of the time, which is a core component to our way of thinking. Human rights are not always popular, hate to say it. You need look no further than the comment section under a popular crime case to observe that. The vast majority of people will throw out privacy or due process, the right to a trial, free speech, etc., for others that they dislike or that they're mad at the drop of a hat. We instead recognize that there are some things that should never be left up to a vote of popularity, and chiefly among them are inherent rights, which we define in the Bill of Rights. And that brings us to the U.S. Constitution. It's important to know that the U.S. Constitution is a body of work explicitly meant to restrain the government, not the people it governs. This is backwards from pretty much every other governing document in history. The founders believed the people and the states maintained the vast majority of their rights under a representative government. So vast, in fact, that the extent of those rights that we held could not be thoroughly covered in such a document. So instead, they felt it was easier to expressly tell the government what rights it had, and since those were so few, they believed that could be summed up under the U.S. Constitution. At the time of its drafting, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists had this intense debate on whether or not a Bill of Rights was even needed. The Anti-Federalists were really concerned with a strong central government, and essentially they refused to ratify the Constitution without a Bill of Rights, which was a document that would reiterate the inherent rights government could absolutely not violate. Thomas Jefferson said, "A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, general or particular, and what no just government should refuse or rest on inference." As I've said on the show before, people tend to get very confused on rights these days and believe that they are entitled to any number of services that they are absolutely not entitled to. A good rule of thumb for determining what is or is not an actual right is to think of it like this. What human rights are you actually entitled to that would exist if there were not a single other person in the world? The right to speech, to have your own religion, to self-defense, to privacy, all of these things come to mind. And then think, what rights are you entitled to if you consent to be a part of a governing body? What does the government owe you before it has the ethical or moral authority to remove any of your liberties? Due process, an attorney, the right to representation, a jury trial of your peers, to not torture you. These things are known as positive or inherent rights. They are things that no person can give you, they can only be taken away. And it is these rights that the Bill of Rights enshrines. That by no means indicates that these are the only rights you maintain between you and your government. Again, the entire Constitution is meant to restrain the government, not you. But these are rights that are so non-negotiable, the founders decided to codify them in the Bill of Rights. The Constitution can be amended, and that has happened numerous times throughout our history. To do so, an amendment must be proposed by 2/3 vote of both chambers of Congress, or 2/3 of the states can come together and basically demand a convention for the purpose of amending the Constitution. This is what the Constitutional Convention movement is currently seeking to do, though I find it to be a highly misguided mission. Next, the amendment would have to be ratified or approved by 3/4 of the state legislatures. Now, let's move on to the branches of government. At the national level of government, you have 3 branches. The presidency is the executive branch, the Supreme Court is the judicial branch, and Congress, made up by the Senate and the House, is the legislative branch. Each branch is given specific jurisdiction and powers and is also given the ability to act as a check and balance on the other 2 branches. The legislative branch is supposed to make the laws. This is where public policy change should happen and the majority of issues should be decided. Given the makeup of Congress, that is supposed to require a lot of compromise and negotiations between the members. But this branch has largely been broken down thanks to the 2-party system. Most legislators no longer have the power to really amend, vote on, or even read the bills under consideration. Leadership of the 2 parties instead works with special interests to draft legislation and then basically tells its members how they will vote on those bills. Should they go astray, the party will primary them, fundraise against them, and overall seek to push them out of office. Because of this, Congress has become more of a performative body. Most of the members do little more than fundraise for their respective parties and go on TV to get sound bites that they can use to drive donations online. The legislative branch, theoretically, has the ability to be a check and balance on the president or the executive office by passing bills that overturn their executive orders, approving presidential nominations, or impeaching the president. They have the power to check the judiciary by passing bills that thwart the decisions judges may hand down. The judiciary branch is supposed to evaluate the laws and check them for constitutionality. They do not make laws, or at least they're not supposed to, but rather rule on the constitutional authority behind them. They can check the legislative body by overturning laws they pass, or the president by refusing to uphold executive orders they may give. And then the executive branch is supposed to be the branch that carries out diplomacy, acts as a figurehead for the state, negotiates and signs treaties, and overall enforces and upholds the rule of the land. They do have what's known as the power of the pen, where they can issue executive orders, but this was meant to be largely a symbolic power, not one that allowed the executive to actually make the laws. However, given the breakdown of the legislature in recent decades, the executive order power has exploded. Presidents issue executive orders more than ever before, and they often use them to act on major policy issues when Congress won't. The president has the power to veto laws that Congress passes, though vetoes can be overridden with enough votes. Aside from the three branches of government, there are numerous other agencies and departments that help the other branches carry out their duties. The Department of Justice, for example, is overseen by the U.S. Attorney General and works to uphold the laws set by Congress. The Department of State works for the executive and is responsible for foreign relations, and it is overseen by the Secretary of State. All in all, the president's cabinet includes the vice president and the heads of 15 departments: the secretaries of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, Labor, State, Transportation, Treasury, and Veterans Affairs, as well as the Attorney General. All of these people are pretty important. What's interesting about the structure of our government is that the federal model is basically replicated throughout each state. In every state, there's a state constitution, an executive branch, which would be the governor, a judicial branch, which would be the state Supreme Court, and a legislative branch, which would be your state House and Senate. And while fewer people pay attention to this level of government, it is actually much more important. Your state and local governments oversee issues that have a far greater impact on your day-to-day life. How much do you pay in property taxes? What happens if you get caught with marijuana? Where can your kids go to school? How many hoops do you have to jump through just to work your job? How much of your money goes to corporations via crony handouts and corporate welfare? How widely available is healthcare in your state? When can you carry a gun for self-defense? How many jobs are there in your state? The list is endless. But because too many people focus on just the national level of politics, the majority of these decisions get to be made in the dark and with little accountability. But the good news is, it is still much easier to impact public policy at this level. If you call your state representatives, chances are you'll actually hear back from them. If you care about an issue, you can make the drive to your state capital to give testimony on it and raise your voice. I've been able to pass a lot of bills at the local and state level by merely organizing, raising the alarm on issues, and working with others to raise a small budget to work with. You could easily too. This process is actually known as lobbying. Lobbying gets demonized in our society a lot, but lobbying in and of itself is actually not an issue. At its roots, lobbying is merely the act of educating and petitioning the people who govern you. That's exactly what you should be doing as an active and engaged citizen. The only problem with lobbying actually traces back to special interests and their ability to use donations and campaign funds to insist lawmakers vote a certain way. But that isn't necessarily a problem with the act of lobbying. It's a problem with campaign finance, the overall money in politics, and the fact that the government oversees too many things. If the government didn't have so much control over industries and our welfare, there would not be an incentive for companies to pad the pockets of politicians in order to incur favor. These are all valuable discussions we can and should be having to address the money in politics. While I stand by Citizens United, which is a Supreme Court decision that said money is speech and therefore companies and their owners cannot be told how much of it they can spend on politics, I do think there are other angles to consider. While individuals and their businesses have freedom of speech and the right to donate their money as they choose, politicians have no right to accept donations on the other side. One policy suggestion I've been developing for the past few years would be to limit how much money a politician could accept from outside their district. If politicians are supposed to represent me in a representative democracy, it is a gross injustice to me that they can take 10 times the amount their citizens can give them from those outside their district. Who are they really representing at that point? Certainly not me. I no longer have any voice in this process, just the illusion of one. So instead of demonizing the simple act of lobbying, we should instead be looking to address these larger root issues in our system. So there you have it. This is a basic primer on the structure of our government. I hope this helps you feel better positioned to participate in it. So get informed, get active, and stay based.